Welcome to Practical Believer, where I talk about putting your beliefs into practice. Today, I'm going to talk about a very important topic to me. And if you know any future parents, or you're a parent right now, after watching this video, I suspect it will be an important topic to you as well. I'm going to talk about circumcision, or genital mutilation, and why I think it is a barbaric practice that deserves that moniker, and that it should be generally avoided. I will briefly skim over the secular, or otherwise known as the scientific aspect of it, and then cover more scripture, specifically from the Quran. But I think that it would be beneficial for people that subscribe to the Bible to listen to this as well. Without further ado, let us proceed. Circumcision, the process of cutting off the foreskin of the penis, is ubiquitous in many countries around the world. There are a variety of reasons for doing this, but they mainly fall into cultural, aesthetic, and religious reasons. The foreskin itself is a fold of double-layered skin that contains smooth muscle tissue, blood vessels, neurons, skin, and mucous membranes that cover and protect the penis. The foreskin is mobile, fairly stretchable, and acts as a natural lubricant. In Western medicine, it is described as the prepuce, which would make it analogous to the clitoral hood in women. Though I am going to talk about scripture and focus on that, I just want to stress this point again. This is a living piece of tissue that has neurons, blood vessels. It is not a vestigial organ. It serves a specific and important part of the penis. It serves as a protective and lubricant layer for the penis. It contains thousands of neurons that help men experience pleasure during a sexual experience, and also helps ease women into sexual intercourse, as a natural penis has some flex and give during intercourse. Again, this is also analogous to the clitoral hood in women, so very similar to how the clitoris functions in a woman's vagina. There are dozens of resources that go over the medical issues involving circumcision. I will list some of those in the description below. A quick summary from the medical research I've reviewed is that men that are circumcised often have a higher likelihood of abusing drugs and having risky sexual experiences. This can be attributed to the lack of pleasure found from having sexual intercourse, as the neurons responsible for transmitting these signals were torn off at birth or shortly after birth, but this is conjecture. One thing that is often cited by people of quote-unquote science is that getting circumcised is good for preventative health because it decreases the risk of penile cancer, urinary tract infections, and can assist with other genital complications. And while preventing penile cancer is true in a sense because you're tearing off or cutting off the penile tissue, if you cut off a piece of living tissue, it would be logical to conclude that you would be less likely to develop cancer of that part you have chopped off. However, know that penile cancer is extremely rare, and if one were to follow that logic, it would make sense to advocate for girls to get their breasts chopped off to prevent breast cancer, which is a far more prevalent ailment in society. However, I imagine if someone were to start to advocate chopping off women's breasts to prevent breast cancer, they would either be laughed at or shunned outright. There are a few extremely rare cases that would necessitate circumcision, but typically this should only be done as a last resort after less invasive methods were attempted. I would also like to add that there are no medical organizations that recommend circumcision as a routine procedure for all males. It is often left to the parents' discretion for obvious monetary, cultural, and religious reasons. If you're interested in more scientific claims, scientific quote-unquote claims debunked, please check out doctorsopposingcircumcision.org. I'll leave a link in the description. It is a great resource that debunks many of the myths regarding circumcision. There are also a variety of organizations, such as the International Coalition for Genital Integrity, which speaks out against genital mutilation. But now I would like to shift my focus to what the scripture, specifically the Quran, says about this. I will avoid hadith literature as I do not subscribe to it. However, even if you do subscribe to that, I think the verses cited from the Quran will still be helpful to take note of. All of the following verses come from Sam Guerin's excellent translation, which you can find free from Quranic.com, but feel free to look at any translation or iteration, and the general message should be the same. First, and probably most importantly, the Quran makes no mention of circumcision at all. There are no recommendations for it, and everything regarding circumcision as far as Islam goes is found in the Hadith, which is extraneous literature attributed to sayings of the Prophet written down hundreds of years after the Quran's inception and the Prophet's lifetime. This is not comprehensive, but here are some passages that, in my opinion, makes genital mutilation, also known as circumcision, at odds with the message of the Quran. And He is the Mighty, the Forgiving, who created 7 heavens in layers. Thou seest no disharmony in the creation of the Almighty. So look thou again. Seest thou any rifts? Chapter 67, verse 2 through 3. We have created man in the best form. Chapter 95, verse 4. And blessed be God, the best of creators. Chapter 23, verse 14. The work of God, who perfected all things. He is aware of what you do. Chapter 27, verse 88. That is the knower of the unseen and the seen, the mighty, the merciful, who made good all things He created. Chapter 32, verse 6 to 7. God it is who made for you the earth a fixed lodging, and the sky a structure, and fashioned you and made good your forms. Chapter 40, verse 64. He created the heavens and the earth aright, and He fashioned you and made good your forms, and to Him is the journey's end. Chapter 64, verse 3. Set thou thy countenance towards the doctrine, inclining to truth, the nature of God with which He endowed mankind. There is no changing the creation of God. That is the right doctrine, but most men know not. Chapter 30, verse 30. And then here's a passage that I feel specifically is a prohibition, in my opinion, against this barbaric practice. And they call, save to a rebellious shaitan. God cursed him, and He said, I will take of thy servants an appointed portion, and I will lead them astray, and I will arouse desires in them, and I will command them, and they will cut the ears of cattle, and I will command them, and they will change the creation of God. And whoso takes the shaitan for ally instead of God, he has suffered clear loss. He promises them and arouses desires in them, and the shaitan promises them only deception. These, their habitations is hell, and they will find no refuge therefrom. Chapter 4, verses 117 to 121. Please feel free to look over these verses and ponder over them. I hope this will at least give you some pause in thinking about the topic. And for those that believe in the Hadith and still think circumcision is something that should be done to prove that one is a Muslim, despite the fact that this is antithetical in the Quran, I would warn you against forcing a child to go through the procedure and rather give them a choice when they are an adult. No compulsion is there in doctrine. Sound judgment is clear from error. That is chapter 2, verse 256. A good resource regarding a lot of these verses collated is a website called QuranicPath.com. I'll link the page that contains a detailed argument regarding genital mutilation or circumcision. I do need to forewarn you that there's some images on the website that can be disturbing, as it shows some of the details regarding how the mutilation occurs. For my Christian brothers and sisters that subscribe to the Bible and think that circumcision is something that is prescribed to you because it is in the Old Testament, I would invite you to take a look at what Peter has to say in Acts 15. There are countless other areas in the Bible that are both for and against circumcision, but I would just like to point out that there is not a unified, cohesive stance that proclaims that it is to be done if one is to be a Christian. Either way you look at it, it should be something that an adult male should decide for themselves rather than forcing a child or baby to undergo. So now that you have been given the case, what now? This is the most important part in my opinion. You know any soon-to-be parents? Give them the facts. Share with them the verses that you've pondered over. Let them know about all the contrary evidence that groups like Doctors Opposing Circumcision has produced. You need to raise awareness in your community. Now, I know that raising awareness has lost lots of meaning in our society and has become cliche with the advent of social media. But this is quite different from changing your profile on Facebook, retweeting, or giving a thumbs up on a video, or attending some sort of protest for some new cause of the week. This is something each and every one of us can have a direct impact upon. This is not carbon emissions, fiat currency, the massive debt of nations, state-sponsored abortions. This isn't the military-industrial complex. Unlike those things, this is something we can have a direct impact on. It's not like virtue signaling, voting, tagging someone on Facebook, or arguing with a random person on an internet forum. This is real. We can prevent the genital mutilation of a child, possibly preventing him from having medical, emotional, or even spiritual issues in the future. Who cares if the society doesn't deem it important? We don't live in a society that values males. People talk about changing the system and fighting the power or saving the children. This is a real way to do it. I'm sure all of you know either a soon-to-be parent or a parent themselves. Even with your own children at an age appropriate, you can talk about this with them. And for all the children that this happened to, you can bring this up to your parents, which might not be as useful, but it would be a good conversation to have. I also think husbands should bring this up to their wives at a time appropriate, ideally before children are involved. In this day and age, especially at the time of this recording with the 2020 presidential election going on in the United States, it can be hard to focus on the things we can actually affect, as society wishes for us to be focused on the virus or which color party will control the government. In my opinion, it is often more difficult to bring up topics that are tangible, real, things we can actually control. So next time you're at the dinner table with the family, before talking about left versus right, red versus blue, Labor versus conservatives, Awami versus BNP, nature versus nurture, Sony versus Microsoft, talk about something that is personal, something that you can actually change. You may seem like a weirdo for bringing it up, as everyone wants to talk about the things the media wants them to talk about. People may laugh at you for being so passionate about something that, to them, is so mundane, so normal. But as a believer, I think you should tell them the truth. As God says in chapter 2, verse 42 of the Quran, and clothe not truth with vanity, nor conceal the truth. Thank you for listening to this talk. And God willing, you'll put your beliefs into practice.